that make the same grip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region. For we women and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean and the Caribbean and the Caribbean.
Poverty is hell, and the angels are in paradise, driving in their limousine, where everything is nice and clean. A poor man living in a tinny-winny hut, children hungry, nothing in the pot. He gone by the neighbor to beg for some rice. The neighbor under pressure, boy, things ain't nice. He gone in the big shot area to beg. A police put a bullet in the tinny-winny leg. He gone in the courts and he lost the case. The prosecutor say he have a bandit face. Poverty is hell. Poverty is hell. Oh, don't you know? Wake up in the morning and the baby cry. The sugar pan empty, the milk bottle dry. The little boy child on the mango tree. The mango queen putting up his belly. The young girl bawling, she wouldn't settle. She whine, she bumsy with stinning nettle. Toilet paper, they never had. They used to do in the gully by the old backyard. They rub she down and they put she to sleep. But the rain come down and the house asleep. Poverty is hell. Poverty is hell. Let the music now. A poor man always dream a lot of dreams. Happy like a puppy when he dream another dream. He dream that he have a new roof on the hut. He dream that he have some good food in the pot. He dream that he have a rich friend named Frank. He dream that he have a lot of cash in the bank. He dream that he pay all his bills for the month. He dream that he have a new car in the front. He dream that he have to go to a vet. He dream that his pocket have a big fat wallet. He wake up in the night and he rush for his pants. All he found in the pocket, a whole lot of ass. Poverty is hell. Poverty is hell. Don't you know? A piece for a boy and a piece for a girl. A piece for the neighbor daughter moon. You know the cat in the corner looking the best. Little Jack corner kick him in the leg. Go in the room and look for a rat. The rat in the roof, he know about that. Now the cat see a chicky chong, yeah, yeah. He rush for the chicky chong. But the poor little chicky chong threw away like a chicky chong. And then cockroach gone in the condensed milk. Mama get vexed for she condensed milk. Who leave the condensed milk open? Come here, you picky head, good for nothing. Mama get vexed and she blood get hot. She dropped some lash in the you know what. Poverty is hell. Poverty is hell. doing it as only he could do it. Winston Bailey, The Shadow. Poverty is hell. I regard that as one of the most profound calypsos. Calypsos are profound by nature. But that calypso, I think, is most profound. And one of the ways you know that the message of a song, a calypso, is profound is when other calypsonians quote it. And I can think about 7, 8 instances where other calypsonians have quoted Winston Bailey, The Shadow. Poverty is hell. And it has to be a profound calypso because poverty itself is one of the profound realities of our time and all times. And that is why we, in this age of relative plenty, we feel that poverty has to be one of the first things we tackle. I paid attention to the third stanza. He said, a poor man dream a lot of dreams. He dream about a lot of money in his pocket. He dream about the roof in the house. He dreamed that he could fix the roof in the house. And I want us to focus on that dream, because one of the popular sentiments, certainly among the elites in the society, is that poor people, the victims of poverty, those poor people, that they have no plan about how to get out of poverty. That if you put money in their pockets, that they are going to do all the negative things with the money. We went through that debate only recently. And here Shadow is saying that poor man is always dreaming about how he could make himself better, herself better. And then he wakes up from the dream and he goes into his pocket and he finds that the pocket get a lot of nothing inside. And Shadow is making the point there that if the poor man, when the poor man gets a windfall, to quote Professor Thomas, he is very clear, she is very clear in her mind what she's going to do with that windfall. And that is why I focus a lot on that third stanza. Welcome to Politics 101 this evening. It's our Open Word podcast, and we come at our discussion from the standpoint of the political economy. And of course, we are accustomed to talk about the economy as though it is unrelated to other things. No, the economy is as related to politics, as related to the law, as related to sociology, as anything else. It's interconnected, and that is why a lot of times we talk about the political economy. Welcome if you're joining us from Guyana. If you're joining us from outside of Guyana, welcome to our Open Word edition, and it's nice to have all of you on. My God, have you all heard recently, former President Donald Ramotar said that he would have sought to renegotiate the contract, the oil contract, and Irfan Ali waded into him. Reminded me of Mrs. Jagan when she disagreed with the PPP's withdrawal of advertisement from Stabroek News. And the Honorable Barra Jagdeo, then president, said that she's a private citizen. A private citizen. What a lash at someone who made him president in many regards. And here is Irfan Ali saying everybody's an expert now on oil. I mean, yes, But this is a former president, your leader, someone who would have mentored Irfan Ali. And all he basically said, he didn't go into any big critique. He basically said, well, you know, it's better to try to negotiate the contract than not to try. And I'm less concerned about the correctness of Ramotar's position or the lack of correctness. What jumps out at me is that if the PPP, if Ali cannot deal with mild criticism from his own elder in his party, will he tolerate it from me or from those of us in the opposition? I think that for me is the big issue here. The lack of tolerance for any dissenting opinion. It's palpable. And this is the person who's talking about one Guyana. I mean, you can't even have a one Guyana in your own party when it comes to varying views. As I said, I am not fetching water for Ramotar's view that the contract should be thing. You know, there are all kinds of views on the contract. But the fact of the matter is that there is a former president giving his view. He's from your party. And you are running around the place talking about one Guyana, and you can't stand another view inside of your own party. And this is the big beef we have with the PPP and the government, is that in the age of the petro state, the opinion space, the diversity of opinion, the diversity space has shrunk considerably. Welcome to our Open Word edition. Professor Clive Thomas is here with us, and we are going to be talking about universal basic income. This thing about tackling poverty is a serious issue. And as we have argued here on this program, that there are all kinds of proposals that are being made as to what we should do with the oil and gas windfall. Lots of them are one-dimensional. We should spend on infrastructure. That is where the government head seems to be. Some people are saying you should spend on education and health and so on and so forth. Very few, if any, of the proposals are saying that we could spend on all of those things. And none of the proposals has taken the analysis beyond the enumeration of the things we could do and take it into the realm of analysis. When you lay all the possibilities on the table and you do an analysis of the society from its historical perspective, from the development of its economy, its political economy, and your analysis must take you somewhere. And we in the Working People's Alliance, our analysis takes us right there to poverty. And therefore, we have situated poverty at the center of all the other policies that have been advanced. And you all know that we have advanced policies. We have had advanced policies that have to do directly with oil and gas. We've talked about the National Oil Company. We've talked about research to bring us up to speed as quickly as possible with renewables. And we have also raised the question of poverty in a frontal way, even before forest oil. We have sought to situate our developmental thrust within a larger regional perspective. So we have advanced ideas, but we are saying at the center of all of this has to be this question of the alleviation of poverty. As Shadow says, poverty is hell. The little boy wake up in the morning, he can't get nothing to eat. And the rich people driving around with the limousine. And he go and he steal from the rich, and the police put a bullet in a teeny weeny head. Shadow making the linkage there between poverty and class divisions in the society, and how the institutions, like the police and the courts themselves, are hostile to those victims of poverty. That the institutions themselves in the society are not about, but punishing people as victims of poverty. Welcome again to Politics 101, or Open Word Edition. Let's bring in Professor Clive Thomas. Professor, how are you?
Good evening, David. Fine, thanks.
A lot is happening in the world. As we speak, another war has broken out there in the Middle East.
War against civilians.
My. I know from constant conversations with you that you worry. I mean, it's one of the things you tell us in the WPA all the time, is that the world is at a place that one worries about the world. Here's it, we have the war in the Ukraine that's been raging for over a year and a half, and now we have another war in the Middle East. A few comments on that development there in the Middle East.
It's a war against civilians.
Yeah.
And that is the part of it that is most tragic, because the victims of war are ultimately civilians at every time and every space. I don't know what you can expect when you have an open prison with 2 million people living in an area less than the size of the Washington city, and the Americans could be backing the war being declared against those citizens. The occupying power controls exit and ingress into the territory. They control water. They control electricity. They control every single movement that is meant to make a community survive. So people are left with very little alternatives, and we need to envisage the responses of people to such brutality and such continuous forced occupation of their own territory, because they've been moved from their lands to be put there in order to facilitate the establishment of Israel. But the thing that ultimately scares me, at one point in time, Guyana was the possible location of Israel.
Oh, yes, I was telling friends that up to last night.
Yeah, and this always comes to my mind, because I said, of all the many things Guyana came close to being, all the flashpoints in the world include a possible location of Israel, and all those conflicts that we have been able to now live without.
Yes, we could have been the Palestinians. I told that to friends last night, of course, who were not aware of it. And you could see on their faces, and these were not scholars and so on. They were ordinary friends of mine, brothers and sisters. And when they heard that, I can see the look on their faces, because they're seeing in real time what's happening there in Gaza and the West Bank. It's frightening, Professor. And part of the coverage, I think it was Saturday, I heard, must have been on public radio or one of those cable channels. They were given an economic profile of that, what you call open prison, of those 2.2 million people living there, and the level of poverty. I don't have to tell you the level of poverty, given what you have said there about the controlling power and the cramming of people in that space is stunning. Stunning.
Most densely populated part of the world at this point in time. It's horrific.
Terrible, terrible. Which brings us to our own country, because as you pointed out, we came close to Israel being located in Guyana. But more than that, we are a post-colonial society, post-slavery society. We have inherited our own issues. Among them, poverty is very stark. We have a windfall now of oil revenues coming in to our country. We know that despite all that the government says is spending, that the poverty rate is not something that we would be proud of. I said in my introduction that the WPA feels that there has to be a multifaceted approach to development, to the use of the oil revenues, but we have situated poverty, the issue of poverty, at the center of this vision for this petrol state that we are part of now. Why poverty at the center?
Well, it has to be at the center simply because without using some of the windfall revenues to address it. And the reason why we've chosen the Buxton proposal or the cash transfers as the only mechanism to do it is that it is the only effective way that we've seen historically. And therefore, we believe that the resolution of this problem has to be treated as a priority, because I don't want the end of the oil comes to an end and we're still left with massive structures of poor people living in the traditional post-colonial type of poverty that we've been accustomed to. We have to remove that from the face of Ghana. The simple, most urgent task that we have been inherited to accomplish. But it doesn't end there, because when you remove poverty, we have to develop a society. So this talk about the removal of poverty is linked to the future development of Guyana, because the precondition of solving the poverty, of removing the wastage of human resources, removing the wastage of people with skills, people with the ability to innovate, people with the ability to have vision and see a different type of world, without removing and giving us those opportunities, we cannot liberate the country, we cannot liberate the region, and therefore remain in a sort of bondage that has brought us from Africa and Asia into the Caribbean. And we can't let that continue unabated. We have to fight against it, much as the people in Palestine are fighting against their jail. It's a natural ABC. It's a necessary condition for life. Any thinking of the future of Guyana and any vision of us as a people must be as a free people, free from the bondages and strictures and the deprivations of poverty. And that is why it becomes the most important task, because the biggest hurdle and obstacle to our development at this point in time. But it doesn't end there. So our fighting to eradicate poverty is a step towards the liberation of the country's resources and its people, so we can begin to think of a world of different perspectives, of different opportunities, based on different principles and a way in which we can build and create for ourselves. So that's the vision that we have when we talk about it. And I'm happy to say that the sense of this vision is growing wide and wide, and far more importantly in other important circles of opinion. I think I mentioned here before the Global South Tricontinental Social and Economic Research Institute has a global project to try to sort of engender the growth of a development theory that is rooted in the extinction of poverty as any possibility of existing anywhere within the global south. It's an ambitious project, of course, once you begin to talk in those terms. But we have to match the ambition of the persons who live here, because almost everybody who was part of the project believes it can be done with the proper distribution of resources, with the proper application of knowledge, with the theories that we have been able to develop so far, even with the contribution of the institutions that we have built for this purpose, like the United Nations and its agencies and that type of thing. We can go a long way towards doing that. So even things like the universal basic income transfer schemes are now being promoted, at least in a serious way, by the leading institutions, surprisingly, despite the initial disdain for them because they felt like giving money to the poor people. The World Bank, the IMF, all these institutions that we would be flexibly criticized are producing studies which show more and more that they have a place to play in the future development and removal of poverty from the face of the earth. And so we can learn from them because they themselves are learning from the practice of development policy and practices within the global south. So I think that we are in the face of a serious human endeavor, and we need to make the effort to contribute to it.
Professor
Many people think it's purely abstract, but it's not. It will have real impact on the lives of real people. This is when you social freedom, it's not only the live. You're fighting for remaining in poverty because without the forces who are keeping you in poverty as slaves, it will felt you will be abandoned, you won't be able to run your own country. Everybody scoffed at the idea. But we can see that this was nothing really that difficult to do. And even though we made mistakes, we can do it. Because I think humankind has that capability and possibility inherent to it, because we are the only manifestation of an independent source of consciousness in this entire world that we have ever discovered. There's no other proof of other forms of life yet. And so we have a responsibility as the only things on this entire universe that we have identified so far that have the capability of consciousness, of the ability to think of another world, to think of the difference between life and death, that we have a responsibility for developing the world in a different way. So this legacy is not a trivial legacy. It's
Professor
an elemental
Clive
legacy.
Yeah. Professor Clive Thomas here on our Politics 101 edition tonight, our podcast, Open Word, the Open Word. Welcome to all of you, whether you're joining us from in Guyana or you're joining us from the Caribbean, the wider Caribbean. You all know there's this foolish discussion going on about whether Guyana is the Caribbean and all that kind of nonsense.
Major hype.
Major hype. And some of the responses themselves are as equally uninformed as Major Hype himself. Professor, what do you make? I mean, gosh, we have had to grapple with this issue. Well, not grapple. We have had to teach it. There was never an issue about whether we are Caribbean or not. But give us a background of these terms, West Indies and Caribbean. Today in America, they're celebrating Columbus Day. And he's the one that gave these outposts, the name first West Indies and then Caribbean. Give our audience a sense of what is the Caribbean.
Well, I remember that one of my neighbors, whom I didn't know at the time, happened to be Van Sortimer, although I'd met him when I was in London. And he was then writing in the book. Yeah. He came before Columbus.
Columbus, yes.
And that was the great sort of thesis of the region, that we had an existence even before Columbus came. And that there were civilizations here. And there were peoples here going back time immemorial. And from that, I think I learned a lot, quite a lot. And having decided after university to go and live in Jamaica and teach in Jamaica at the university and live in Jamaica until I was evicted, gave me some very important lessons in life and certainly expanded my knowledge of the Caribbean. And I could see how in many, many, many ways we were one people. We come from one culture, one civilization. And I think it had distinctive forms and distinctive collaborations because it was blended with a mix of colors and Caribbean ethnicities and imported ethnicities and passing through ethnicities and linkages to the wider Americas, linkages to the North America, where many of us migrated again, and linkages to Europe, especially in my part of the Caribbean, Britain, which was an important outpost. In fact, I went to Britain as a migrant. I'm not a student. Many people don't know that.
Okay.
And then I decided to study.
Yes, as I listen to that discussion with Major Hype and so on, it takes me back to Norman Gorfan, who I'm sure you know, who I know very well. And Gorfan himself has this definition, or these definitions of the Caribbean, which I have to teach, which you have had to teach. And so the whole notion of them and us in the Caribbean, Gorfan really laid that to rest with his definition of the wider Caribbean and where the Caribbean Sea washes and so on and so forth. This notion of an island Caribbean, do you attribute it to what, the education system? I imagine we have the sea.
We used to call Guyana an island too, surrounded by land.
That's right.
Because the settlement was so narrow on the coast.
Yes.
Landmass surrounded by land.
Yeah. I would imagine with CXC that they would be using Gorfan's work and so on to really give our young people a definition of what the Caribbean is and so forth.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is being done in schools now.
Yes. But big up to all those Guyanese who really stood up and in their own way pushed back against this hype by this young man who clearly is uninformed.
I think one good way to practice history is the growth and consciousness of the cricketers. Up to the period when we became dominant in cricket, was the period when we were most dominant in our sense of being Caribbean.
Yeah.
And I think that had a lot to do with it, our dominance in cricket.
Yes.
Because we had to find an expression, and the expression just came naturally in playing the sport and the way we played it.
Yes. Professor, let's go back to the issue of policies and approaches to dealing with this question of poverty. As you have pointed out, there are now institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, United Nations agencies who have wrapped their minds around this question of poverty alleviation and the concept of the universal basic income. In fact, you have cited two reports or two studies, one by the World Bank and one by the IMF. And you use those as a kind of jumping off point for your analysis of universal basic income and cash transfer. Tell us what those two studies have said about universal basic income.
The first thing to note about the study is that they're relatively recent.
Uh-huh.
The World Bank study was, I think, completed in 2020. And that one tried to survey the practices, the concepts, and the sort of guiding principles around which this has been practiced across the entire world. So it gives you a sort of global documentation of the various types of universal basic income schemes that exist. There's not been a clarity or a definitive statement on what they exactly mean. That is what they've discovered. That things that are called universal basic income vary from country to country. But if you were to take it the way in which we use it, as an income scheme that covers the entire population, and therefore its universality is a central idea, and it's also unconditional. It's given to all people. And when it's given to all people, those who get an augmentation in their income will be liable to income tax, so you can recover from that income tax payment any excesses income that they might be able to draw down on because they have previous employment or attaining salaries well above their poverty limit. But in order to avoid the risk of any exclusion, or arguing from the thesis that it's better to save one poor person than to give a non-poor person an extra benefit. Starting therefore from the clarity you seek to introduce into the scheme and to ensure that there's nobody falling between the cracks by giving to all households. That's how our scheme is built. We ensure that nobody will have a basis for saying that they're still living under poverty. So despite those principles which they accept, many people call different types of things universal basic income schemes around the world. Some countries or states in the US have given for a period of years, 10 to 12, unemployment benefits to everybody or to most of the people. Some people have given it based on attendance at school for the children in the household and health participation to ensure that you don't spread communicable diseases within the population. So there are a variety of ways in which they define. But what I found consistently is that they argue that most of the debates are just heated, more heat than light. And a lot of it is due to misconceptions. So people are fighting for things which are the mirror image of what they themselves are proposing, because they don't want to create dilutions of their concept. But when you would cut to the chase and you insist on the central idea, despite the heated controversy, there's a strong case to be made in certain circumstances where you want to get rid of poverty quickly, where you have the proper administration, where you have the proper amount of resources being made available, like in our case, the windfall oil revenues, to finance the scheme that we should go ahead. So that is what I draw from the studies. And I've reviewed both the World Bank study and the IMF study as introductory sections to our study of the same or recommendation, the same proposal for Guyana, the Buxton proposal. That in a nutshell is what it is.
Yes, and you did identify 5 components.
So I said there are 5 or 6 basic mechanisms.
Mechanisms, yes.
That the country apply in this to deal with the issue of poverty. One of them is the universal basic income.
Yeah.
They have others like employment, jobs for everybody, which has its own limitations and which can lead to a lot of errors in application.
Mm-hmm.
It can lead to wastage because you're actually giving the people a task for which they have to fulfill to get the income, and allowing them to go and undertake the task that they themselves would like to undertake. That task must be sitting around all day because they're employing them. And so as far as they're concerned, the end of the task is when they exit from the job. So you can get a lot of wastage in that way. Marshalling people going in team that we used to do with the scheme that we had before independence. Not before independence, but we had at one point in time. The various schemes for sending students and so forth to get exposure to development ideology. It can also be introduced just to strengthen the social welfare system that we have it. And that many people also would like to support. We also can have it to deal with special circumstances like Dutch disease created by the windfall revenue. By Dutch disease, it means a situation where the exchange rate rises or we don't diversify the economy and the non-oil sector becomes inefficient and stifles growth in the economy. So these are the different types of mechanisms that we use. But the universal basic income is the one that we selected. We're doing all, but we're prioritizing that to solve the problem of poverty.
Unless our viewers think that this is something novel, we know that it has been tried with some degree of success
Yeah.
in Latin America, in parts of Africa. But
Sure.
even in our own CARICOM region, we know that Jamaica has some element of it. Barbados has officially embraced it. And I think the United Nations, up to 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they were doing a study in the Eastern Caribbean to determine the utility of the universal basic. Yeah.
I think the boldest statement so far has been made by Motley.
Yes.
Committed to an okay place in Barbados.
If you will, Professor, tell us how that universal basic income, which of course, as we've been saying, is a global phenomenon now. But tell us in terms of the particular situation in Guyana, how the universal basic income, more than others, would help Guyana deal with the question of poverty.
Well, I think mainly because it's feasible.
Uh-huh.
We know the number of households, they're not too large. They're about 200,000 households, roughly speaking. And we know that 5,000 US would carry them above the poverty line, everybody above. You will get back a significant part of that income from those whose incomes are above the poverty line. So it's all gross, but the net transfer would not be that large. So we know that it falls within the scope of the earnings that we would get within from the oil revenues. And we have also set a limit to how much of the oil revenues will be dedicated to that scheme, and that we graduate its introduction based on keeping that limit so that we don't deny the other sectors of the mechanisms, revenue for their development, like education and medical and that type of thing. And we found that it can be done and eradicate the remaining poverty in Guyana based on and that proposal by around the mid-2030s, by which time we will be producing about well over 2 million barrels of oil per day. I figure 2.2.
A couple of weeks ago, Professor, you did say that, look, we can get rid of poverty in half a decade. And that jumped out at me. Because you did make the point that given the kind of revenues that are projected to come into Guyana, that poverty in itself would go away eventually. But
it's going away. It is going away slowly.
Right. But you have argued that for an intentional intervention, yes, and you're saying that if the intervention is intentional, we can get rid of it, I think you said, in half a decade. Expand on that for us.
Well, that is where the figures I just quoted come in.
Yeah.
Because 2,000 or 20,000 households by 5,000 US sets the maximum gross expenditure on the income scheme. The net expenditure will be for those who are receiving above the poverty line, their tax payments, but we can assume that may be around a third of that as a minimum. But we'll have to do a study to fix this. And that can be easily done by the Ministry of Finance. So that is how we're thinking to do it. And the numbers have shrunk since I have been doing the study. So the proportion of the income that will come back in this scheme from taxation would be far higher than it was a year or two ago. Because even without the scheme, the total numbers of people are being reduced. Because remember, the scheme has been around since about 2018.
Yes.
And over the 5 years, we probably lost about, we reduced the poverty by, I can't remember exactly by how much.
Right.
But certainly by a few thousand.
Right.
Based on the regular figures.
Right. But of course, there's the argument that while the figures may show a reduction in poverty, in the lived experience of people, they don't feel that poverty has been reduced.
I know, but we'll have to deal with that. That will be a problem. It continue to be a problem.
Yeah.
Because people will, as the poverty declines, people might want to push up the threshold. And we have to also take that into account. People may feel that 5,000 is not enough. When I first recommended it, people were saying it was outrageous. I know one guy who is working for well over 100,000 in the US, and he said I recommended an outrageous figure. I didn't want to quote his salary against him. I said, this is what it is of your salary. Because they were so grudging to give to the poor people anything.
Yes, Professor.
So when you divide that by 4.2 persons, it's not all that much money. It's just over $1,000 each.
Professor, I know the WPA has embraced it, and more organizations have come around to embracing it. But the major stakeholders, in particular the two major political parties, the PNC has come closer to embracing it. The PPP has not budged on it. Are you hopeful that it is something that, and I must say that without any scientific poll, one can safely say that the ordinary people, the ordinary masses, to whom the policy is intended to bring relief, they have embraced it. Are we hopeful that the officialdom will very soon recognize where the world is going, not where Thomas says it must go, but where the world, where our
But
region.
you made the argument against that already at the beginning. If the man would listen to the former president just because he disagreed with him.
Yeah.
And I thought it was pretty brave of Ramatar too, given the close role that he has played in awarding the oil contracts that presently exist before the auction, and his therefore legal responsibility for them, quote unquote, or political responsibility for them, that he would call for the renegotiation. I thought that was pretty brave, and I think that I would like to encourage him to continue to make a point. I don't think he should stop at just flying a kite. He should continue to try and make some east out of it. Because I think the right set of circumstances will at least encourage a study. I would like to see a study done where we assess the technical feasibility of the proposal.
Yeah, but as you were saying, and I think you've answered the question there, that perhaps as we stand now, the biggest obstacle is not whether the thing makes sense or it doesn't make sense, but it's the way our government deals with proposals that do not emanate from their ranks.
But they're seeming ranks.
They're seeming ranks because one would think that Ramatar is part of their ranks, and right. So I think you were saying that that's the big obstacle. There is the way in which they deal with proposals that don't come from them. But I want you to keep going a little bit on the Ramatar thing, because part of our struggle over the years is precisely that. How our governments have dealt with dissent, how they have dealt with developmental proposals that don't come from within their ranks. And I say that because as I look around our region now, when I, as a little boy, came into politics in the 70s, when proposals like the universal basic income would have been considered left-wing, and the so-called governments wouldn't touch them because they were too radical. Now we see a lot of those proposals are being implemented in parts of our region, less so in Guyana, but more so in the wider Caribbean. Have we matured, CY? Have we matured in that instance, or have we really?
We better be no.
Yeah.
Yeah, we still bring a lot of prejudices to it. I heard a senior figure in the energy sector berate the UBI scheme in Texas. I mean, they're talking about something that is so ill-advised, and the tone and the language used.
Yeah.
It's like this introduction that I gave to the last version of the UBI scheme. Remember, the leader of the party that I supported in the election, the APNU, was most dismissive of what he called a handout.
Yes, a handout,
He said we ain't giving nobody no handouts. And yet he would give the GMSA handouts all the time. So they don't realize the absolute similarity of the proposal with what they do regularly for the private business sector. So ultimately, it's really a contempt for people. It's disrespect for the poor people that make them do that. They cannot conceive that they are capable of receiving wealth from Guyanese. And if they can afford it, they give it to the private sector. Because they have this notion that it trickle down. Going to the poor people will never trickle up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Professor Clive Thomas here. Really, we are talking about the universal basic income, cash transfer, and other progressive policies that um, our ruling elites are so resistant against, and the world is leaving us behind in that regard, because while others are maturing, we in Guyana seem not to be maturing. Professor, we have the problem of our ethnic or racial problem, which is we don't often talk about it in real sensible ways and serious ways. But tell us how your proposal, the WPA's proposal for the cash transfers, how that in itself um, uh, 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 deals in a positive way with the racial issues that we have in Guyana. Meaning, how does it contribute to a kind of racial equality, racial equity, and a kind of multiracial outcome?
Deals with it centrally. Because the idea is by making it universal, the point I stressed at the beginning, I mean, deny having to make selections of households and therefore to join criticisms from the constituencies across Guyana that people are selecting them in a biased way. If everyone has an entitlement, and then if you're not entitled because you're not poor, you pay the income tax on the income, and we know you have to declare that because you can only get it if you tell us what your income is, and it's integrated in the taxation system, then you will recoup whatever you got from taxes. But if you don't do that and you end up having to pick which household is poor, you're bound to get controversies.
Yes.
Some group is bound to say that they were left behind. And particularly in areas where monetary income might not be the sole source of income.
Yes. And of course, we are going to take some time, probably in our next program, to delve a little bit more into the question of race, ethnicity, and the political economy. Race, ethnicity, and the political economy, because a lot of talk has been swirling around about evidence and data and so on. And Professor Thomas, I remember very well back in 1997 when ACDA held a conference. It's a long time, and it doesn't seem so long, Professor. 26 years when you made that seminal presentation at that ACDA conference. And it became, if you were, the benchmark for a lot of the discussion that we're having today on data and evidence of ethnicity and the economy. Perhaps at the next program we can get into a larger discussion of that. Yes. Yes, Professor.
I think those things are all complementary to the Buxton proposal.
Yes.
Because I consider that the twin pillar for dealing with the racial issue in terms of economic policy.
Right. So at the next program,
next week, yeah.
Yes, next week we're going to get into that dimension of the Buxton proposal on the question of race, ethnicity, and the economy, because it's not going to go away. In any, there used to be an old feeling that once you enlarge the pie, automatically the racial question goes away. Well, we have seen the opposite. I remember my late friend, who you know very well, Clarence Ellis, we used to have back and forth on that question. And by the time Clarence passed away, he had come to realize that that theory may not necessarily be true. And I always say, my God, I'm glad, I'm sorry he didn't live for this period, because he had been thinking a lot about those issues in the last decade of his life. Professor Clive Thomas, always a pleasure having you. As we continue this journey, we continue this discussion of trying to put the building blocks together for our new intervention as a country, as a Guyana that is made up of different ethnic groups who came here in different circumstances, but we all are here today. And the biggest challenge for us as we enter this period of windfall, happenstance, as Thomas calls it, but this new period of windfall, the challenge is how to make our multi-racial society, how to make our multi-racial society benefit from this discovery of oil and the flow of oil wealth. We may get everything else right. We may get the classical economics right. We may get better contract from Exxon. But if we don't deal with, as Thomas said, those twin factors, if we don't settle the question of poverty and the question of equitable distribution along ethnic lines, we really are not moving forward. And so I'm glad Professor Thomas said at the end there that they're complementary. They're twin. The question of poverty and the question of making our multiracial society work for all ethnic groups. Professor Clive Thomas, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, David.
And we are all learning as we go along, and that is the beauty of a place like Guyana, a place like our Caribbean, is that given the history that we have come from, we have to continuously be searching for ways and means. We have to operate at various levels at the same time. We have to settle the day-to-day issues that we encounter, the issues of crime, the issues of prices in the market, those day-to-day issues that our people have to deal with every day. And then we have to settle the larger problems, the larger issues that are going to take us once and for all out of the economic prison that we found ourselves in when independence came 60 years ago. We go out tonight with our eye on the terror in the Middle East and the way in which part of the popular opinion is treating the lives of the Israelis as different from the lives of the Palestinians. They're all human beings. And it's a tragedy that people on both sides have to die in a war that could be prevented. But even as we make our commentaries on what's happening there in the Middle East, we have to recognize that a different value system for the humanities of people is not something that we should be tolerating in 2023. As we move deeper into the 21st century, this question of the value of lives itself has to come from a democratic place. It has to come from a place that recognizes that we're all human beings. We're all human beings. And it hurts to hear the emphasis on the lives lost, the Israeli lives lost, and the American lives lost. And as if those lives that are lost on the Palestinian side means nothing. We are going to reduce Gaza to rubble. That's what you're hearing. Those of you who are God-fearing, pray. Pray for peace. Pray for equality of humanity. Those of you who are not God-fearing, let us hope that the forces of enlightenment, and I'm not talking here about European enlightenment, I'm talking about an enlightenment that comes out of the experiences of those people who've been downtrodden, the sufferers, as the Jamaicans and the West Indians refer to them. That enlightenment that comes out of our own struggle will lead us to embrace a philosophy and an understanding of life in today's world. See you all tomorrow when we come back again to do battle. Tomorrow is not promised to all of us, but we hope that we are here tomorrow to continue to tell the story.
One race from the same place that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region, for we women and we children.